Appreciate the time to speak with you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the unfair advantage we're starting to see by applying AI with market intelligence. We'll get into a case study today, and we have time on open questions. Otherwise, happy to chat afterwards with you. But I wanted to define first, what does it mean before we get into that? What do we think the unfair advantage is when we look at, we have all this data, we hear all this stuff about AI, most of us have AI programs or AI vendors we're working with. How do we actually create that unfair advantage? And for what we really see, it's about how to break down the silos and create the opportunity to cross-collaborate. Now we're going to, again, I'll go through a case study about this, but this is where we really see companies that are investing in the small incremental ways to shift this paradigm, shift into that cross-collaboration for launch, post-launch, and change how we think about the advantage that they have. So a little bit of numbers, stats on the data, AI guys, so we always defer to numbers. We'll not have too many for you today. But when we think about where we're at, whether it's from Deloitte or our friends at CS Associates outside here, McKinsey, we're seeing about 85% across the board of every pharma company is investing in some form of artificial intelligence, whether it's at the pilot level, the program level, department, or organizationally looking how to restructure around AI. But what we're seeing, what we're hearing is fundamentally 43% of those executives going back and saying, hey, we still have these siloed insights. We still have these pieces that are not communicating or are making an investment here, 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 and here. They're not communicating, and we're not actually moving the needle as a fundamental of the business. So how do we rethink that problem? And really, the siloed systems is what's creating that. Let me talk about what the systems are when I talk about that. Yes, sometimes we mean the fundamentals. I mean the database that's in London, that belongs to medical, the commercial database in New York, and Frankfurt, who has some clinical data and maybe some sort of data swap that you need to ingest. But we also mean the processes, the systems that are inside the organization and the leadership around those processes that break down those silos. So whether we're talking about fragmented insights because of the gridlock, departmental silos, because even if they get access to the data, they can't talk to the experts of that data on the other side for whatever reason. And also the fact that we all default, we see this all the time, in this manual process. Right? So you default into the manual process of looking at the data, trying to derive those insights. And by the time you get that information back from whatever company you're working with or consulting, or just internally, it's already too late. You've already missed that. So those are the components we see over and over again when we work with organizations that are kind of slowing us down as a team. Of people trying to execute the pharma. So when I mean unfair advantage, going a little bit deeper, is what is the competitive edge we can give? So we'll get into a case study here. We'll talk about that as speed to insights, not the volume of data. What I often hear a lot from our customers when we engage with them is, I have all this data, but I can't make sense of it. Or we've done these pilots, or we put Gen AI of some form or fashion on a bunch of data, and it still comes out very generic, and you're not collaborating as to why. And what we found, and the reason why we'll get into a little bit, is it's misaligned to the business objective. Just because you have all that data doesn't mean it's the right data to answer it. Just because you have all that data doesn't mean you should use all that data. So some of that actually slows down your ability to be efficient and your ability to be innovative, because you're looking at too much data and the models are trying to understand too much at the same time, and it's basically obfuscating your ability to deliver to the business. So as we think about this, I kind of like to break this down the three-step journey that we take our customers through, and that I've seen over and over again work for customers, whether they're working with us or just they're very innovative and doing it a very structured approach. They're starting with a focused department. So they're really looking at a use case or a series of use cases that are department covered. We're not trying to solve this at an organizational level yet. Let me get started. We're trying to find one or two places they can pick on. They're looking to connect across. Right? We see this over and over again. They're trying to remove the silos from the beginning. So they're looking to, okay, if we solve it here, how do we take the next step and put 2 together, or 3 together, or 4 together around the launch in particular. And then we see a full-scale enterprise-wide, and that's a group set. I'll show a little case study slide there from Novartis and our friends at Pfizer, who have already jumped into some of this area where they're looking and applying this at enterprise-wide, but they started through this approach, and this has been the journey that they take. And I think the word journey here is really important when we work with companies. This is not an out-of-the-box solution. I would say any vendor that comes to you and says, hey, we can just put your data in our system and provide you an answer right away, it probably is taking you down the wrong path and definitely not the right journey to get to the business objectives you're trying to solve with all this data and AI to move faster in the market. So I want to talk about a case study. This was a recent one for us in the last year. One of our customers came to us and said, hey, we just acquired this asset. And it was a bit outside the mainstream to looking to diversify the pipeline. The asset was about T minus 12-ish months, plus minus, coming to market for launch. And one of the individuals we work with came to our team and said, I've got this spidey sense that we've got all this data from them that gave us when we went through the acquisition. We think we've got a good plan for how we're going to go to market, but we're not sure that we really understand it. And we just bought it, it's too late, and now it's on my desk. What can you guys do to help me make sure I understand what's going to happen with this? So we got involved, and the goal was how quickly can we get them an answer, because if they're trying to make decisions, they're already going, putting together all their content, all their educational materials. So the first question that came to us was, we understand our data. What other data sets out there are the right data sets for the market landscape to apply to this? Which one should we have? We know we can go get all this data from pubs and clinical trials and social media. Is that the right move for us? What should we do? How do we pull this in? And this was a launch that was starting in the US and quickly going global. So we had to look at global EU data in particular very quickly tag on. They didn't want to wait and make one decision and finally it doesn't work the other market. The other part was they were not interested in getting another dashboard, right? They did not want another Power BI dashboard that their IT team just put on top of a data swamp and to figure out what to do with it. Now they're manually going through the data. They want something that's very natural for them. And they came up with what at the time seemed very daunting, and it was, and it still feels that way. I talked about it. It was 8 weeks. They needed this now. There was no room for us to move or to shift the schedule because they were literally starting to print some of the content and hire these resources and deploy them throughout the world. So how did we go about this? Well, first we took their data in. We took some of their data in. Right? We did not take everything that they had, right? Which is what they started to do when they got in this predicament. They couldn't understand if they were going in the right direction. So we took in some of their information. We aligned that with some of the public data that was out there that we have access to, that was the right data sets to look through this. And then we worked with them, and what was really interesting was the leader said, I'm gonna leave the team alone, and they're a highly cross-functional team. So what we want you to do is build an interface that focuses and amplifies that cross-function sharing in a compliant way. And through that, we're able to provide one interface for all 3 team members that are part of this new acquisition. As they get ready to launch, they can all see their components, be in the same room, talk in a compliant way, but actually make decisions and not have those silos. So we're trying to solve 2 problems at once. One was the right data analyzed and the right data delivered to the right people in the room to make that thing, to make those decisions. That was really a case study for them internally to think through with new asset acquisition. That are smaller organizations, can we lead them in a cross-functional way that allows them to move faster and make smarter decisions? So 2 things came of this. This was a great aha moment, probably for data geeks and analysts like me. Probably not so much for the customer at the time. It definitely was at the end because they were able to pivot. But what they found was they were predominantly focused in the initial acquisition on PCPs and endocrinologists. That was where they were targeting all their medical education, all their commercial teams, all their regional deployments. Everything was focused on this. That's what they bought. That's what they understood. When we amplified their internal data sets with our market analysis and then asked the business objectives of the AI, where should you be? How do you solve this problem? What are you going to do with this to get market penetration? And our models could answer that. It changed everything. What we actually found was it was the mental health providers that were the individuals they needed to target. So that was a massive aha for them at the right moment of time because they were able to shift how they think about where they're going to go. Yes, it was obviously a little bit painful because they're already down a little bit of the path, but that spidey sense and the need to go amplify and understand the business objectives by looking through the market lens plus their data provided that answer. The second thing was the treatment pathway. In addition to looking at the mental health professionals, we were able to look at where else are these really happening. And because this was an infusion-based drug, infusion centers are both prescribed and fulfilling. None of this was on the radar at the time. This wasn't even a contemplated conversation because they assumed that was downstream from where they needed to target, from where they need to hire resources that understood how to get into that deal with market access issues going into that. That fundamentally changed both hiring and deployment of resources for this organization. So again, when we look at the benefit of this, we talk about the fact that when we're able to find the right data in a compliant way and provide that cross-functional against launch, or pick on launch, or any other business objective, and we start from the business objective, not from the data up and how I add more data into my models and all the data IT geeky things. We're talking about what does the business need to solve and how are we going to do that. We can see this accelerate launch. We can see the strategy is now being verified both by the data and what the market is saying that you already have. We create a single source of truth. No longer is this sitting in 5 different silos. There's one place for them to go. There's one interface for the team to access, and they solve the components they were allowed to see in a compliant way. But there's no longer 4 or 5 different systems, which is very common in some of the existing enterprise systems today. And they created a partnership, right? Coming to us with this 8 weeks, for our customer already exists. It was definitely more advanced than it was here's a box and here's a tool. It very much needs to be that understanding because we have to understand the business objective they're ultimately trying to solve, not just that, hey, I need to understand my market landscape. That wasn't what it was. The actual business objective was, I've acquired an asset. I'm concerned I do not understand the market landscape, and I'm concerned I'm applying both education, resources, and other things to a pathway in a process that I'm not sure about. That was a real business objective. So be able to look through the data, train the models, and actually put that back out in that view, that solves the problem. So we talked about this, as I said earlier, 85% pharma companies. I said 43% insights earlier, because I think that's a good point. This is also another, I like this one too, it's 40% are not seeing ROI. That's huge, but only 40% are getting it. That's massive. Over 50% of this not getting that. And I think we've heard some of the panelists today, I thought were really great about everything from organization to data to models. It's really fundamentally rooted in the fact that are we asking the right questions when we start this process? Or are we just trying to use AI because it's a term du jour and we've got to be innovative? That's all well and good, but if you don't ask those business questions, you're not going to be able to actually be effective in that process. And then 60% struggle with data integration across departments. But if you look at what we've done there, you look at that case study and the flip of it. So when you think about how you sell this to your CFO, that's always the question again. How do I sell it to my boss? How do I include these type of systems in our process? How do I get this over compliance? How do I get them championing with legal to push this over the line of procurement and all those challenges? Well, when you're able to show 50% improvement, and you're able to show 12 to 28% on average of success and speed in launch, those are pretty significant percentages by dollars and cents, right? So I always think about know where the money is. That's where you start to show the CFO you can do this. They become the champion in the product process and the acquisition process and this change management process. And we think these numbers not only are backed up by the industry, but backed up by the case studies and the work that we've been doing ourselves. And so it's not just about us. I wanted to show another case study from our friends at Avaris. A project they took on all internally. I thought this is one of the penultimate ones of not only following that journey that they took, but it started small, but once they started to really go, we have a saying in AI and data that we bought from the military, is you start slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Right? So you start really slow, pick on 1 or 2 things, get smooth, get your process, make sure it's line of business. Once you have that, you can really start to pick up momentum. You start looking at this as how do you apply AI across your data at the organizational level. And that's what Avaris did, and they ended up reducing how they think about project setup by breaking down those silos, having a unified process across an organization led, where they're going down to days to launch new analytics products to solve a business problem for Department A, Team A in Department B, Team C in Department G, wherever here, they're able to move very, very dynamically because of how they set the foundation of their data to move through, and that really does provide that competitive advantage for them because they're able to use their data plus outside data and answer the questions just faster than most other companies in the market at this point in time. So how do we think about building our unfair advantage? Some of the step-by-steps for me is you start with the structured data capture. I understand depending on where you are in the organization, on medical or commercial, that may or may not. There's definitely challenges in change management of everything from what is an observation, the best way to put it in, through, and what is an insight, and those pieces. But as you work and as you continue to fight that fight and move the needle on those components, depending where you sit inside the organization and inside the ecosystem, that structured data makes it faster for us as the AI teams to move faster and analyze it. Enable secure sharing. That's pretty obvious, but that's one we deal with all the time. We have these data lakes and data swamps that are all over the place, and they can't talk to each other, and they're built on different compliance systems, and some are in the EU, some are in APAC, we have ones, LATAM, and then the US, and we're trying to figure out exactly how they align, make sure they can do it in a compliant way. As you work through, you think about data governance from the onset of this problem. It changes your focus and allows you to think about this from a global perspective to answer all the business problems in the future. Integrate the unified platform with strategic utility, as our case study showed, and Pharma has shown, and Pfizer as well, and others. You have that unification, it changes behavior. It just fundamentally moves the needle for how fast you can move and answer business problems that come up. And then obviously using AI, like you've heard that enough today in this whole process of how can you leverage this? They can see things we can see, we can move faster through the data, we can move through it manually. So definitely setting all that foundation up so you can actually use all the really cool things and shiny objects and all the other terms I heard here today about AI, you're able to actually leverage now. And why it works, right? So it's because we're not just looking at tech, right? I don't want to get in the dogmatic fight of tech versus people versus tech. I think it's both. Like you have to have good tech that enables good process and workflow for people. You have to integrate into the workflow. You have to show them ROI out of the gate, but you also does have to have some form of change management process. There is definitely going to be an evolution, whether we're talking about the data that was just here before, whether replacing systems or not. There's going to be a change in how we operate and work. We need to account for that from the beginning. So again, as we think about climbing, choose your strategic insight, act on fast, prove it, go slow, figure it out. Start to get smooth. Slow, you're smoothing now, you got some early concept, you got some cross-functional data, you're moving through the process, your organization's understanding, you got governance aligned, you have your CFO aligned, your legal aligned, you're able to move through this, you're able to show that you can maintain compliance. And then as you go through this, lean on agility intelligence. Don't worry about size alone, don't worry about having all the data in, worry about having the right small data sets in that can change how fast you can move and get to insights. So these are the things that will not only help you prove value, but will help your organization and help you manage up to prove that value as you move through it. So in the unified domain, we've seen this work a few times. We're continuing to work with companies, and we're continuing to see companies with or without the work that we're doing move the needle, move this direction, push this unification for this early and often. So this is, I'd love to take any questions that you have at this time. And otherwise, if not, I'd be happy to chat with you outside the booth. Maybe I'll go a minute or so left.